Everyone, welcome to our first webinar of 2023 with our ICL champions. Chris Lewit is somebody who I have huge respect for, an unbelievable junior college player, but more than anything else, a real student of the game that understands, coaching. He's written a fantastic book, amazing podcast, really to analyze and deep dive on Spanish tennis. We've had some people on the show who he's written articles about, but really more than anything else, Chris embodies ICL, the mantra of understanding the importance of character, the discipline of the game, and really understanding that the sort of education, the physical, mental, emotional, and academic piece all kind of go hand in hand in, not only just making a great tennis player, but a great human being. So I'm really looking forward to welcoming Chris to the first webinar of 2023.
Thanks, Kirk. I appreciate it. Well, I hope that everyone can learn from my experience, both as a player and especially as a coach working so many years now with juniors.
It's so exciting, right? It's we were just before the webinar reminiscing, we're of the same kind of vintage, similar tennis teams, knowing, tennis as you get older becomes a really small universe. And I always tell our families that these players that you start with, when you're in the juniors, like a lot of them are with you on this whole journey of life, I've reconnected with college partners, with junior players who have kids, and it's just amazing the different stages and levels. And I think both of our goals as educator, coach is how to best prepare young people for the sport. And as you probably agree, the sport is life is the sport. They go hand in hand. And I'd love to just go back to kind of the beginnings, how did you develop your passion, and then what transition to make it this purpose, into coaching, and really going beyond just coaching kids, but studying, constant educating yourself about what this crazy, exciting, great sport of ours is.
Yeah, well, it's a long story, but I guess in the beginning, my dad was a coach, and as I mentioned to you, I'm born and raised New Yorker. So even though I'm in Vermont, I still coach back in New York, and I have lots of players from there. So that's kind of where I made my name. And my dad he fell in love with tennis, and he actually taught in Forest Hills. My dad is from Flushing, from Queens, and he taught me the game when I was we started about 10 years old. And as I mentioned to you, we moved to New England out of the city. And I just started playing in public parks, and my dad taught me the game. Unfortunately, I think he taught me a serve and volley game when I was a kid, and I wish maybe he had taught me a little more the Spanish way. Mm-hmm. But he started me at the net, and I developed a really big serve, and I had this attacking game when I was, I loved, Edberg and Sampras and, all of the aggressive net players at that time.
Yeah, in that style of game, I mean, just not to cut you off, I have to throw in that I learned how to play tennis at Forest Hills. So Forest Hills was my home club as well, and we've had some pretty solid New England players. We had James Blake here talking about in Connecticut and playing the New England.
Kirk, I can tell you a really cool story. My favorite James Blake story, if you have the time. If you're interested.
Absolutely,
I know James from James from the juniors in New England. And a story that I tell, I didn't know if it was come up, but I love this story. So we played in the boys 16s, and I was up 6-4, 5-4, and I had 2 match points against James Blake. But let me get back to the really amazing part of the story. His mom, Betty Blake, is like the nicest, kindest person ever. And I lost a contact lens in the warm-up with James, the match. Guess what she did? She had a spare contact lens. Yeah. I came off the court. I was going to default. She gave me a contact lens. I went, put it on, and I subsequently played the match against James, 6-4, 5-4. 2 match points, hit 2 passing shot winners, and I lost in 3. But this was just an amazing story about the Blakes, you know, the character and doing the right thing. Because what would most parents do in that situation?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. You're out of luck, kid.
Yeah, too bad. Go play with one eye. You know, that's an absolutely true story. Amazing story about the Blakes. And I don't get a chance to share that story very often, but you brought it up.
You know, James, it's funny because, you know, all of these webinars, they kind of compound, right? Everyone, you know, we mentioned Spanish tennis. We will get into Joffrey Porta. You know, my Blake stories were not as fun as yours. I think I got less games off of, I played both Tom Blake and James Blake. And I think I got a total of less games won than you did in both of my matches.
Well, they were pretty tough. You know, those guys were good. But but I started as serve and volley. Now we see very few serve and volleys on the tour, you know. And when I went, you know, that later on, I went to study and train in Spain, and I became obsessed with the Spanish way of training, which is diametrically opposed to that, the way I learned from my dad back in the day, you know, which is interesting. And we can talk about those two opposing styles and way to develop your kid, because I think parents are not sure, you know, how much should they work on the volley? How much do they want to develop an all-court player? Is it okay to have a player who is very defensive, or, you know, a counter puncher? You know, parents a lot of times have those questions.
Tons of questions on that, and parents are constantly, you know, the game is evolving. It's interesting now. You see Tsitsipas, Shapo, like some people sort of melding those worlds now a little bit. You know, it's an exciting time for tennis on the pro level. I think the juniors also now with NIL, with, you know, the competitive nature of college tennis, you know, being at kind of an all-time high, it's probably challenging for you. You know, first I want to talk about, you know, when you sort of, if your style, when you were a student of the game, obviously you played, you know, number one at a fantastic college, great program. So your education was real. You don't just kind of get in. It's like with James, you don't get into Harvard or Cornell, you know, without sort of understanding that the education piece as well is instrumental. So how, you know, so you moved to New England, your dad was coaching, you're playing the juniors. Obviously, you just gave away the fact you had 2 match points against James Blake. I mean, that was a pretty super high level of playing. And then, you know, what did you find in that transition?
As a kid, I was I think very incomplete. I had a lot of up and down results. I was known as like the guy with the big serve, could get some big wins, but also erratic, you know, sometimes erratic. So I think learning to be, later on in my game, I learned to be steady. I learned the Spanish way. I learned to be solid from the backcourt, and that gave me more options. It gave me much less anxiety on the court. I think to play a super aggressive serve and volley game, to me, serve and volley is the most aggressive style you can choose. It can be stressful because if your serve is not on, if you're not pinpoint, you can put a lot of pressure on yourself. And so back then, I think looking back, I think my game was unbelievably incomplete. And I spent the last 20 years, even after college, after trying to play on the pro circuit and getting injured. I'm still working on my game now because I play with my students all the time. I still see myself as a player in progress, you know, and still I'm in every day, even when I'm hitting, I'm trying to improve. So I think my game now is so much more complete because I went to Spain and I learned how to play Spanish way. And I had the younger years where I was very good at the net, you know, very good at attacking, gave me a great balance.
So that's unbelievable. So when did this sort of Spanish way, and, you know, if you can kind of summarize, I think I might have to put in some of our courses, maybe a little bit of some homework, because it is a great book, you know, to be able to study the Spanish way. If you could summarize a little bit for people here, sort of how you found it.
Yeah, that's actually something I would love to help with, because I enjoy teaching, like being, you know, I love sharing about Spain and Spanish tennis. But essentially the thesis of the book is that there are 6 secrets of Spanish tennis, for lack of a better word. And the main thrusts are that Spanish players learn to move really well. They have very good footwork and movement. They are typically very consistent players. That's a second thrust. A third sort of pillar is that they work on tremendous racket speed and weapon building, particularly with the forehand. In Spain, they're obsessed with the forehand. They're obsessed with developing a massive forehand, especially with topspin.
Yeah.
So that's a major pillar in Spain.
And Carlos
And
may have had a club as a hand. I mean, his forehand was just monster.
who did you say?
Carlos Moya.
Yeah, Moya, but it started with even going back to, there was a player, Jordi Araci, there was Sergi Bruguera. Sergi Bruguera had the most massive forehand of the time. And he revolutionized. Yeah.
How do you describe how Bruguera held? I mean, this guy won 2 French Opens, and I can't figure out how his hands were like around the grip.
He wasn't as extreme as like a Beresitegi,
Yeah.
or he actually was like a Nadal. His grip was very much like a strong semi-Western. He wasn't as far as you think, but he revolutionized the game. And here in the US, we had players at that time, same era, like Jimmy Arias, doing the same thing with the whipping topspin forehand that his dad taught him. You know, his dad was an engineer. And so it's just a fascinating time in the history of tennis in terms of the game evolving and changing, especially on the technical side. But going back to the pillars, there's in Spain, they develop very good defense. So they don't just teach offense, they teach a very good defensive game. So even the players who have weapons learn to defend well. And the last 2 pillars that I mentioned in the book are they build just absolute physical beasts, you know, like soldiers. And they believe in physical superiority, that you have to be physically superior to anybody else in the tournament. And they spend a lot of time on the physical side. So that's very, very typical of Spanish training and Spanish philosophy. And they believe in suffering. That's the last pillar, that everybody loves my chapter on suffering. And it may sound foreign to some parents or players who are listening or coaches, but they actually do believe strongly in teaching the players to suffer from a very young age, to learn how to suffer, to be willing to suffer. And eventually, like Rafa says, if you've ever heard the quote from Rafa, a lot of times he will say, I love to suffer when I play. And so those are the main secrets of Spanish tennis. There's more, obviously, but that's basically the thesis of the book.
It makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, when you look at the just army of players and the opportunity to go down to Spain,
yes,
the way they train. I mean, obviously now, you know, with Rafa's kind of sunset in his career and seeing Alcaraz come out and play 4 or 5 setters and just smile after a, you know, 45 ball rally that he may have lost the point and he's still just smiling. It's something very unique to see. And unless you understand that Spanish style of play, you know, when we look at sort of where American tennis has come from, and don't get me wrong, we have another webinar coming up to announce. We have JJ Wolf coming up, who is a very aggressive, more, you know, style of play, jumping into the court, serving volley, big serve, big forehand. But, you know, when you see those 40 ball rallies, you know, that just exhaust me. I feel like I sweat watching them. It's pretty amazing that if now you can go back and trace, you know, those 6 pillars, that you understand that's their mindset, right? That's ingrained from a very young age.
Yeah, it's a fascinating history of Spanish tennis, especially in the last 30 or 40 years, the way the game has evolved there. And it's still evolving. If you see someone like Alcaraz now, who's on top of the world, he plays a very modern Spanish game with a lot more aggressiveness. He takes the ball earlier. He has conservative grips. Like you mentioned, the Western grip. A lot of the Spanish coaches now are teaching more conservative grips. And a lot of the Spanish players train on hard courts about 50% of the time. So Spain is evolving very quickly. And Alcaraz is really one of the best examples of the modern Spanish philosophy, the modern style of player from Spain. And you'll be seeing more players like him because he's so influential now.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see. I mean, I was always his coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, was, you know, number 1 in the world. Unbelievable. You know, when we were growing up, you and I, it was really Swedish tennis, right? Like, you know, we were kind of that era. Like my coaches and my parents, you mentioned the Edberg. We saw, you know, some exciting Sampras Agassi rallies, but, you know, that era that went from Borg and you know, in some ways, a Wilander was a bit like that, you know, the depth.
Yes. So Borg was the model, the prototype for the evolution of the game in Spain. And Luis Bruguera, Sergi's dad, and Pato Alvarez, and they were the grandfathers of Spanish tennis back in the 70s and 80s. And they loved the game of Borg. And they decided to try to build an army of Borgs. Basically, I'm very close to Luis Bergera. I've studied him for years. And he told me he loved the game of Borg. He taught Sergi to play like Borg. And he tried to create a system, a method where he could transform all of the players in Spain into like an army of Borgs. So there's a direct link between Bjorn Borg, the way he played, and the players, the Spanish Armada that you saw coming in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I just think that's fascinating. And the way Borg played, if you look at the way Borg played compared to someone in his era like McEnroe, like I grew up to play like McEnroe, like I attacked the net. And the way Borg played really foreshadowed the modern game of tennis, much more so than the way Mac did. You know, and I did a video for my YouTube channel recently where I talked about if you were in the 70s or 80s and you taught your player to serve and volley, was that a mistake? Because the game certainly has become more like Borg, the style of Borg, you know, in general. There's still Maxime Cressy, what he's doing now in the top 100 is incredible. It's so much fun to watch, by the way.
Yeah.
But he's one of the rare guys that plays the way I learned. Basically, I learned to play like Maxime Cressy does now. And he's one of the only guys doing that, you know.
It's true. It's and there's some sort of forgotten the amount of Spanish players that sort of were hovering in the top 20. I mean, there are guys like Francesco Clave who would get out there and go for days, you know, and just and keep it in and you know, you kind of forget about it because you know, as generations go by, you kind of only focus on the top players, but to, you know, as we are working with a next generation, you know, of students who obviously when you're young and a junior, you always want to emulate something, you know, you always have kind of vision. There's no doubt you always emulate. So to really understand that Spanish style is critical, because even if you are a serving volleyer, I mean, I think now you're seeing a lot of focus on like the complete game, right? You know, the different levels, you know, the days of just being a big serve, you know, big volley, it's harder unless you're, you know, 6'11" like Riley Opelka, but even the big guys now, you know, can all play.
Riley's pretty good from the back.
I was gonna say, yeah, Riley and Isner when they're, I mean, Riley before he got injured was really making, I mean, he was banging him. So
I don't know if the conversation is too esoteric for most listeners, but getting back to like practical, you know, advice for parents and players is you want to have that complete game. You want your player to be, everyone is complete now at the pro level and even at Division I college. And you can, what's great about the Spanish method is you can take parts of it and use it. Like you can develop even if you're an aggressive player, you can develop your defense and you can develop better movement. You know, and that will help you. And you could develop bigger forehand the Spanish way. So you can kind of use, it's kind of modular in a way that the system is modular, and you can take parts of it to help a player. And that's what I do every day on the court coaching. I take what my player needs. Obviously, some players might be more defensive, and one of the cool things about Spain is you can be a defensive player and you won't get chastised for it by coaches. Because here in the US, if you try to play a defensive game, you might get thrown out of your academy.
You're a pusher, or you're, you know, doing it. Yet, like you look at guys like Clave.
Yeah, so there's a big honor to be a pusher. There's no word for that in Spain. One of the nice things is, if I know we don't want to develop pushers. I'm sure parents are rolling their eyes or shaking their heads, but the idea of being steady and not giving away a lot of errors is like the most noble goal in Spain, to be solid, to not give away points, because the grandfathers of Spanish tennis believe that very strongly that tennis is a game of errors, and that the player who makes fewer errors tends to win. You know, so it's the highest honor to be able to go into a match and not make a lot of mistakes. But here in the US, it can be, players can feel embarrassed to be steady. They can be, like I mentioned, they can be criticized by their coaches or by the people around them, which is a shame, because that mindset of not wanting to give away freebies, you know, free lunches or free gifts to the opponent is a really good mental aspect to cultivate. Although, of course, we don't want the kids to play, you know, when we want them to attack and be aggressive, but in Spain, there's no such thing as to go long in a rally and frustrate your opponent is a great honor, you know, to be able to do that.
It's so interesting. we had the opportunity to ICL talk to Mats Wielander,
Yeah.
who also represents both, who said,
Mhm.
he didn't think too much on the court. He just said, if I can hit one more ball than the other guy,
Yes.
a good chance of winning this
And
match. That's all he thought.
and Wielander is a very good example of a Spanish, I would say classical. The way he plays is very classically Spanish. But I mentioned to you, there's a new Spanish mold now, a new Spanish prototype. And the players in Spain are playing more aggressive. They learn because they listen to the criticism, and they know that the tour is mostly on hard courts. So they're it's a constant evolution, a battle that's happening, country against country. And Spain has recognized that they were too defensive in the past, and they were hanging out too much in the back, and they've developed a lot more all-court prowess.
It's unbelievable. And we can obviously geek out forever. And I will tell those listeners, I mean, definitely come in. We're going to do a lot of Q&A. It's what's great is here's a great chance to ask any questions, to chat about not only a Spanish style of play, but what's right for juniors. A lot of time parents and kids, you work up the rankings. I watched your YouTube on UTR, and we have a partnership with UTR. And is there a mindset that's too caught up about what your ranking is? Because we've had a lot of amazing pro players. We had Todd Martin, James Blake, who were like, hey, we were late bloomers. Yes, even though they were good, but the idea that developing your personal style, your game, I think if I'm taking notes right now, that Spanish style can be integrated into any type of player, but it's more money.
And the modern Spanish player is not a pusher. The modern Spanish player plays with tremendous racket speed, and they have a system that develops racket speed. So I always tell my players there's a difference between pushing, because pushing for me by definition means you're not accelerating that much. Yeah. You're usually decelerating the racket through the hitting zone. And I try to differentiate that from maybe grinding or playing very aggressively on the defense and with a lot of racket speed. Because if you're playing with racket speed and heavy spin, that's to me not pushing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that we're coming into a new era of the sport. So I guess, how have you seen it change? From your time playing, when you're playing number one at a Division I college, and then from you had some great competitors to today when you're working with young juniors. I guess is there something you say? Is there too much working? Like what is an ideal schedule when someone comes to train with you that you would sort of promote to stay healthy and to be able to
we'll talk about schedule in a moment, but I wouldn't want players to develop the way I played. And sometimes coaches usually teach their students the way they learn. Yeah. I've fortunately learned that that's not a good idea. I definitely don't want my students to learn like serve and volley first and then try to learn how to be solid from the baseline later. I think that's sort of flip-flop. Much better to learn sort of a solid Spanish foundation and then to add your aggressive all-court play on top of that for juniors. So I always think the base of consistency is a really good house to build on. That's like your foundation. And then if you want to play more aggressive, and that's the way your personality is, that's fine. But it's always on a foundation of consistency. Because if you just play, I have many students who just want to play, the kids see the pros and they see how much power and how many winners they hit and how big the serves are. But they don't realize that most of those pros, when they were 10, 11, 12, they were grinding it out, hitting a lot of long rallies. And they slowly worked up to that power aggressive game. They developed a base of consistency for many years. And most students want to skip that. They just want to hit it like the pros. You got to put in your dues. You got to build that consistent base first. And I think that's usually the best way to do it. Occasionally you have what I call a magician. Occasionally you have a really special kid. I work with a lot of prodigies. Occasionally have a really special kid with great hands, great creativity. And those kids, you give them a little more leeway. You let them create. You let them rush the net early. You let them, you have to cultivate that creative side of those kind of kids. But in general, I would like the students to play a very steady, patient game. Learn to be that way when they're young, unless you have a very special magician on your hands. You have to learn to identify those kids as a coach.
For sure. And I guess that's the key, right? You know, you've now worked for almost 20 years, you know, with developing youth. You know, are there patterns you see or anything that you would sort of advise to parents who obviously learn, it's great that you learn from what not to do, but also, you know, kids that are in ICL, you know, it provides a different scheduling, right? It allows it, it frees up time, but it also focuses on the mental side of the game and the ability to integrate what's going on in school. Because as I got older and talked to some of the top pro players, they were like, you know what, the older we got, we realized that it's math, right? Physics and math. And the more we kind of were analytical about it and to create an understanding, it helped them. And so a lot of times there was this Chinese wall between education, you know, like I'm just playing tennis, I'm just focused, or I believe also in education. And so we're trying to sort of show the synergies across both, that, you know, the
Yeah.
what's going on here is so critical.
Yeah, so I think the scheduling is, I get that question so much from parents, and it's really, there's so many variables. But in general, I will tell you that, and I think you will like this, but the holy grail is to train twice a day. And if you can set up, and the only way to do that is with an alternative school. So for the kids that are trying to be elite players, to make Division I, to play professionally, that's really where it's at. That's the ideal schedule, where you usually practice a couple hours in the morning and you work on your technical foundation, and then you play another hour or two in the afternoon and you play sets and you work on your tactical game. And that's the basic structure in Spain and in many other countries as well. But in general, when you can have and then you also need time for physical training and injury prevention. So when you realize that that's the model to become a world-class player in general. Now, there are some exceptions where players will go to traditional school, but those are the exceptions. The typical schedule is twice a day training. And it's in Spain, they do 2 sessions a day of physical. So that's a lot to get in. There's no way you can get that in with a traditional school. It's impossible. And the other thing that I usually advise parents is, it's very, very stressful to try to squeeze in a lot when you're doing traditional school with long hours. It can create a lot of anxiety for kids. Because, for example, I have lots of students from New York City, and when they're in a traditional school and they're trying to excel in their tennis, there's a lot of late nights. There's a lot of hours and hours of homework. They usually get less sleep, and their anxiety and stress really, really skyrockets. And that's a recipe for injuries and burnout and other problems. So you need some sort of alternate schooling setup, whether it's online, and there are some other options too, but online is a good way to go to provide that flexibility. But you want to train twice a day. And you need to have time for fitness, for performance, and you need to have time for injury prevention, so you don't get injured from playing all that tennis. So where are you going to find the time with just after school? It's impossible.
No, it's so true. And I think, you know, there's now more than ever, we want to emulate the pros, and it's an all day thing, right? If there are matches at, you know, 4 p.m. or like there's a whole process, and it goes down to what you put in your body. You know, when you study someone like Novak, it's not rocket science, right? It's like everything is measured, like everything, you know, from his flexibility to his sleep to his nutrition, and it's everything with a purpose, everything focused, and you don't veer from that, you know, in how you do it. And I think the earlier you can learn that type of discipline, and a lot of the Spanish style in those pillars kind of has that built in a way.
I would tell you that I have these conversations a lot with some kids are not ready for twice a day training. They have to prove that to the parents. They have to show the maturity, you know, they have to show the responsibility. So I don't, you know, there are kids on different levels here. So the first level is to play what I call part-time training, which is just after school, you know, 2 or 3 hours after school. Usually that's 1 tennis session and 1 fitness session, and hopefully prioritize injury prevention, which sometimes is not the case. And I call that part-time training. And then when a player reaches a high national level, usually they start bumping up into the top 100 or so in the country. That's usually where parents and players start to have a family talk about, you know, a school like ICL, freeing up time to start to train twice a day, which will give a big boost to the ranking and really boost your UTR. But you have to weigh the positives and negatives of that. And a kid has to prove that they're ready. If a kid can't be disciplined in a part-time schedule, there's no way parents should be throwing them into a full-time schedule. They don't deserve it, and they're gonna waste a lot of that time. So they should try to maximize their part-time training. And when they show that they're killing it and they're a beast, then you can have a talk about adding the extra sessions in. But it depends on their level and their pathway. And I think the kids have to earn that. That's a privilege. It's not a right.
It's a great point. And again, we talked a little bit about Dr. Lair and just the psychology, the mental side of the game, and giving yourself time to take it all in. Sometimes when you're rushed, at a regular school, you have to eat and then you got to get on court. I mean, there's so many elements now to maximize productivity and that performance, psychology part, the mental side. I mean, the Spanish kind of indoctrinated that idea you mentioned of sort of suffering, but it's also, you want that battle. Like, let's go to a 5-set. I mean, I remember one of our champions, Tommy Haas, shared a story playing Rafa, and he was playing the best tennis of his life. It was like the quarters or semis, the Australian, and he took the first set from Rafa in a tiebreaker. And he said, I played lights out, and he was ready. He looked over at Rafa, and with Rafa's eyes, he said he was so happy. He said, let's go 5. Let's go be out here for 8 hours. And that shook Tommy. It was like, wait, this guy is going to be very hard to beat, because
all the Spanish guys are like that, man. They are warriors. If it goes longer, if they like to suffer. If it goes, the longer it goes, the messier it gets. They love to suffer. But you have to sort of cultivate that when the kids are young. It's the ethos of the whole country. The way they train. They just believe in that.
Yeah, I don't want the walkover win. I don't want the easy fast one. It's like, let's see how it goes.
In the beginning, you have to learn to be willing to suffer. A lot of the kids, I'm not going to say American, there are tough American kids. I don't like to just label Americans as lazy or not tough. We do have tough American kids. But in general, you have to start by being willing to suffer, by being willing to endure pain, and then at some point you can develop this capacity to love suffering, which is not always easy.
No doubt. So, I think what's really important is, with all you guys here, I want to hear from you. I like to open up. Chris and I can go on for a long time about it, about lots of different.
I love helping parents. I spend my whole career in life just helping parents with their kids. I love kids. I have 4 kids myself. So I just like helping families, and I like helping parents, especially on the tricky junior pathway, especially for serious tournament players. It's tough. But there are always questions at any level for any kid.
I know.
And I wanted to mention to you that I also think it's a mistake to train. I have this sort of concept that if a player can make like basically where a player is tells you about their talent. So if your kid is doing like 150 or 200 in the country, and they're training full time, like there's probably something wrong with that. Like if your kid has a decent amount of talent, they should be able to make between 50 and 100 with a pretty, half-time training skill. They should be able to do that. And if they can't do that, something's wrong. It means they're not working hard enough, or maybe they don't have the talent. Maybe they're just not that gifted. And so then you have a choice. First, you have to check off the box. Are they working hard? Are the kids really really squeezing every minute of every practice part-time after school? And then you have to say, make a real assessment of the kid's ability. Like, what is this kid's talent level? And that's a difficult question sometimes to determine. But I think parents need to make that. They need to make that calculation, and they need to make that analysis, because what a lot of parents do is their kid is like 150, or let's say this kid's 200 in the country, and the parents really want them to be top 100. And so they'll go straight to online school, or they'll go straight to full-time training at an academy to try to boost them to like 100 in the country. And I think that's a mistake. The kid may not be working hard, and the parents are just gonna give them full-time training or pay for an expensive academy to try to boost them a little bit. I think the kids should prove it. They should be working their butts off, you know, and then you have a conversation, like get to 50 in the country. I've had players get to 30, 40 in the country just after school, which is unbelievable. Because what happens is if you do that, then you know the kid's working at their maximum capacity for what they have, for the amount of hours they have per week. And then they're going to butt up against the top kids at nationals, like the academy kids at the top of the country. And then then the parents can say, okay, let's train twice a day to try to beat these elite, the best of the best. I think that's a much better way to do it. But I think a lot of parents like reward their kids with the full-time training too soon and too early. You know, it's a mistake. And you see a lot of academy kids that are squandering a lot of that whole experience, you know. I've been to many, many academies where the kids are all just like spoiled and lazy, and they're wasting a lot of time at their academy. And I think that's partly because they didn't earn the right to be there. You know, they just got this privilege. They just got this gift from the parents.
That's a great point. You know, and that's one of the things is how everything ties in, you know, whether it is your academics, whether it's your nutrition, like how you look at everything in life. You know, tennis is a stepping stone to everything, to a career. And I think there's so many ways that we want to incorporate that. I wanted, before time is flying by, Vova has amazing questions here, so I'll kind of run by her. I don't know if she wants to come up and ask them. We're happy to get you up here, but I can start with, you know, for you personally, and also on your program, how much do you practice on court, off court? You kind of mentioned the two.
Yeah. I'll tell you guys, I'm sure parents are curious. The Spanish way, I think you would be shocked. It's not that much tennis. In Spain, they train about 3 hours of tennis a day, maybe 3.5. And that's very purposeful, the way they do that. Because like Luis Bergera says, he wants his players always to be hungry for the next day. Not to do too much, always be hungry for the next day. That way you manage burnout. You keep the player hungry. Like when the player wants to do a little more, stop. And that way you just come back the next day. But what they do is they fill in the other time with so much fitness. Like they spend, a typical Spanish program is about 3 to 3.5 tennis and 2 to 2.5 fitness. It's almost 50-50. And for some players, that is a shock. I mean, typically for American players, it's a shock, because the typical American program could be 4 to 6 hours of tennis and then a little add-on fitness, you know, shock. Big mistake to train 4 to 6 hours tennis and just a little bit fitness. Big mistake. And a
lot of injury. I mean, look, we see a lot, you know, of kids that do get burnout. You know, there are some kids at ICL that have great results and, you know, 12s, 14s, and then injury comes in and kind of plagues you. So, all right, he's here now. There are a lot of great questions. Vova, do you want to come up and ask your questions? I'll jump in for question number 2, which is that question of how aggressive should you play?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
The thing is, I'm actually a kid. I play junior tennis, but the thing is, I used to go like, wait, sorry. My mom's also
here. Turn your camera on, Vova. You want to come up?
Sure. This is me. Hello.
Yeah. What's up, buddy?
Yeah. So thing is, what I was asking, how aggressive should you play? Because let me formulate it. So like in this level, in between pushing and aggressive. So if tennis, like from where should you actually attack the ball, from like the baseline or the half court line, or so
well,
from where should you attack? And another one was if your opponent and you are both far out, so your opponent's far out to the left and you're like far out to the right, should you hit down the line or should you hit to where your opponent is, just because it's the better shot?
Those are great questions. But what's your personality? Do you like to attack or you like to defend?
I like to attack more.
Yeah. So the way you want to play aggressively is based on your personality. It's always based on you. Every player has a different personality and a different Some players are very conservative, and some players are very, very aggressive. They take more risks. So as you grow and develop as a player, you'll have to find yourself, find your style.
And
To answer your question about where to play defense,
yeah.
Ideally you would play defense to your opponent's weaker side. So rather than just pick a cross court or down the line, try to play to your opponent's weaker side. A lot of times that'll be the back end, and you want to play over the back end. In Spain, they say play over the back end. That means topspin high to the back end, but it could be the forehand. It depends on your opponent. Also, I would say to you, don't neglect the down the line defense. In the US, everyone is taught to play cross court defense because of the geometry, but that becomes very predictable. A lot of times you want to play down the line defense because the guy's not expecting that. And then you can sort of predict where he's going to go next. Usually he'll go cross court with the forehand, and then that will set up your forehand. If you go deep high to the backhand, you may end up with another backhand.
And more thing, what is like the big difference between college tennis and pro tennis?
That's a really good question, but there's probably a number of answers, but the speed of the game, the speed is much faster at the pro level. So yeah, so you see guys in Division I college, and they have the same technique as a pro, but they don't hit the ball as hard. And what I've noticed, if you go to like professional tournaments, the players are bigger, stronger, faster. The physical, like the DNA of the professionals are just, they are like freaks. You know the word freak? They're like freaks of nature. And college players are definitely good athletes, but they're not off the charts like you see the top players in the world. They're amazing. They're incredible athletes, like one in millions athlete. And college players are good athletes, but not as good as the pros.
And in like cuss and everything, like how many different coaches and like doctors, physiologists, managers, coaches, how many different of those does like a pro player have?
Some players travel lean and mean, and some players have a big entourage. So it just depends on the player's personality, what they like. Some players just like to travel with the physio or with their coach, and some players travel with the big team. But I would say in general, when you're young, like at your age growing up, be careful having too many chefs in the kitchen. You know what I mean by that? Be careful having too many coaches trying to help you, because it can be confusing. And a lot of kids will go sideways with their development if they're getting too much different advice.
Yeah. And two more things. So first thing, what is the main focus of kids like my age? I'm currently like almost 11. So in like 10 to 12 years old, what's the main focus that, yeah.
It's hard to say, buddy, because I've never seen you play, but I work with a lot of the top kids your age in the country. And I would say that the kids that are top in the country are very, very consistent. So I would definitely focus on your ground strokes, and that is the Spanish way. Are you very steady off your forehand and backhand side? And do you have good movement? Do you have superior movement? And if you have great movement and a good forehand and backhand, you can go to the top of the country at 10, 11, 12, 13. But you want to build your game off of that base, of that foundation of good consistency. Of course, there's other things you can do. You can attack the net. You said you like to be aggressive. That's great. But you got to be solid. And the best kids in the country are very solid.
Okay.
Good questions. Thanks, Ova. And anyone else those are all fantastic. I know I see a lot of familiar faces here. You know, it's really really interesting. So our students, anyone to come out and ask a couple more questions? We have a couple minutes left. I think these are all great. Yeah, let's bring it on. We have a couple minutes to ask.
I think it's great, Kirk, that you start in 6th grade, because a lot of the schools start more in 9th. So, and there are a lot of young kids that need flexibility. So it's really good that you start in 6th for the young ones.
You know, and what, you know, I should talk a little bit about, you know, there are a lot of questions about the social side, and, you know, tennis, you know, in some ways, you know, it is an independent sport, but as you go and play college tennis, I mean, one of the greatest things is being on a team. And somehow the Spanish have found a way, I find, that build a really strong sense of community. I mean, you walk around to Joffrey, Joffrey Porter, any of the academies, it's there's a real camaraderie. And that's obviously at ICL, one of our goals is when you can create a community of like-minded people that are taught the same way, that are aspirational, they're inspired to go after the same goals, but they understand that you actually need each other to help out, whether it's your teachers, your coaches, that while it's an individual sport, now more than ever, you realize that the team component is actually a really important part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you need the academic support and you need a great coaching team around you, right? So you need both.
And peers, right? I mean, I think what people always forget is, you had the opportunity to travel later, you got to see Spain. I mean, what we try to encourage, at ICL is go to South America, go to Spain, take that time to train if you don't have to physically be bound and you're not yet at a level where you have to go to ITFs. A lot of times people come to us because, oh my God, the rankings are so high. Now we have to play the ITFs, which end up being all over the world. My advice would be when you're on that rise up and you're training and you're falling in love with it, that to experience, I was fortunate enough to train in Serbia when I was 12 and then go down to South America. And it's part of your education as well. You're learning a different mindset, but the constraint is everyone flocks to a tennis program in the summer, or I'm just stuck at my one place to train. Whereas it's great to have those pieces of knowledge. I mean, see Spanish tennis firsthand and
yeah. And I'll tell you, how many coaches I've spoken to said they don't have enough money to travel to Spain, or they don't want to take off a week from work to go to Spain. And I was in the same boat. I was a young coach. I didn't have any money, but I had this curiosity and it developed into a major passion for Spanish tennis. And in the early stages, I did just that. I took the risk. I gave up my work and I just went and I immersed myself in studying there and studying with the legends of Spain. And then eventually it culminated in the book. And it's been one of the greatest things I've done for my life and certainly my coaching career. Back in the day, like no one else was willing to do that, and I just followed my curiosity. My curiosity was piqued. And I always tell young aspiring coaches, and I think it's a good lesson for young kids too, to follow your passion and follow your curiosity. Don't, and if it's a different road, take it, and don't be afraid to invest in yourself. Something may be costly, but it's going to be worth it if you love it. So if it interests you.
That's a great point. Laura, you have some great questions. Laura, do you want to come up and ask a question up here, or we have Anurag? But I'll before you come up, I will get to Laura's question, which was really quick about the American tennis. Everyone's always wondering. I mean, we're seeing some good stuff out of the Americans, but why do you think?
We're doing really well. Well, for decades, we've had the best female development arguably in the world, maybe alongside Eastern Europe and Russia. So don't worry about the women's side. That we have an incredible development system for women. And for men, we had we're in sort of a lull. It's getting better, on the ATP side. And we haven't had it. We need a Grand Slam winner badly on the men's side. We're going back to like 2003 Roddick here, It's beginning to be as bad as the Spanish drought. The Spanish had a 18-year drought from 1975 to 1993, where they didn't have a men's Grand Slam winner. And Sergio Bruguera broke that streak. And then we're getting there. We are.
You look at Sebastian Corda. Look, there are up and coming. I mean, there's definitely a field there. I mean, you look at Sebastian pushing Novak pretty deeply, even with an injury. So, you hope that it gets out there. I think that I think it's changing, right? I think that everyone is adapting, and it's the pro tour.
You have to kind of separate our native-born players from some of the top academies in the U.S. We have some amazing academies where the best players in the world come here to Florida to learn to develop a world-class game. So we don't want to forget that. And those players don't count on the rankings list because they're not from the U.S. So we have some incredible academies and coaches here in the U.S. But for the size of our country and the population of tennis players, we aren't producing the equivalent of like Spain or France. And so people always ask that question, why is it? Is it a problem with Americans? Are we lazy? Or there's a lot of debate about what the deal is. But one of the big factors is that we have other sports here, like football and basketball, that some of our best athletes usually, our best young athletes don't always gravitate towards tennis. I don't think we get the best DNA in tennis, basically, in the US. And that's a big, big factor. In Spain, if you're an elite athlete, as a kid, you're probably playing soccer or tennis. And those are the two most popular sports in Spain. And so for a little country, they do tremendously well with their best athletes joining tennis. In the US, a lot of our best athletes are not playing tennis.
That's a good point. And I'll let Anurag, do you want to come in and ask?
Sure. Here's a quick question. Hey, Coach Chris. How you doing? Great conversation, guys. Just a quick question on UTRs, because it came up a couple of times. As a parent of a child who plays tennis, how do you engineer a strategy for developing a high UTR? Because it looks like it's taken over the tennis world. People want to get into the D1 or D2 schools. You got to get to a 10, 11, 12, scholarship or no scholarship. But you got to start traveling because, it's challenging to find and engineer the whole process of, getting to a high UTR. So any tips that you guys can share on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just did a popular podcast where I talked about UTR as God. I was being very sarcastic. Yeah, but it's like religion now for families, for parents, for players. I have players who are constantly checking their UTR on their app. Like UTR has managed to appify basically ratings and rankings. It's fascinating. And it can be very addictive. I think I joked, if I was a kid, I'd probably be checking it every day because I was obsessed with my ranking. I don't know if you listen to that podcast, Kirk, but it's so fun. Like when I was a kid, I think a lot of kids will find this hilarious, but I used to check my ranking. I have to call the office, the USA New England office, and check my quarterly ranking. And then I'd wait for the yearbook at the end of the year. I'd wait for the end of the year book that they would send us. I'd wait eagerly for the mail, and I'd get it like in January or February of the following year. But then I found out my ranking for the year.
Yep. We had Eastern Roundup. I mean, my friend Russell Gimelstob and I, we were joking that we found old copies of it. You had
talk about delayed gratification, but nowadays the kids have it's all on their app, and it can be so obsessive. To answer the question, I think you should focus on your training. You should focus on getting good. What do you need to be a good player? You need good coaching, great competition, and great training. And that's what the legend William Pato Alvarez always said. That unfortunately he passed away this year, but he's like the Nick Bollettieri of Spain, Pato Alvarez. And he said you need those three pillars: great coaching, great training, and great competition. You need those three aspects. And he joked that you also need money to make all those things happen. So,
it's interesting.
But if you focus on those things, your UTR is going to rise. If you're missing one of those pillars, your UTR will falter. And in the early stages, people are way too wrapped up in UTR. And it's true, though, it is like a de facto SAT score for college tennis coaches. And you got to have a 12 or higher to play D1. You just have to, to be a good recruit. You have to.
And we'll get into that. I mean, I think, we'll have, and Chris, we'd love to invite you back for that. It'd be interesting. ICL has a partnership with UTR, Mark Leshley, who's running it right now. In theory, the system it's almost created not to be gamed. In his words, he would say it sometimes before to get points, you'd have to travel. Like I'll go to a different state or I'll win a tournament, because a lot of people know if you played junior tennis when we did, we'd make nationals or Kalamazoo, and then all of a sudden you play, you were top 5 in New England or in the East, and then you're like, I got to play the number 12 guy in Florida, and he just kills you. Like, you get kind of crushed. Yeah. UTR was a way trying to democratize that, right? That you could actually compete like your level where you were. You didn't necessarily have to go all over to travel to do it. So it's an interesting question to see if it can be, kind of gamified. But the bottom line is, as you just said, sort of hard work. It's I would say don't stress the UTRs. Obviously, when you're getting ready to go to college, and just like your SAT scores, like certain colleges want a bar set, and there are coaches that want a bar set with UTR. But if you're going to be training and you are improving, it's really your work and what happens, because the wins with UTR, you can kind of go anywhere, and the algorithm really sort of puts you where your level is on who you beat and all of that. So I think, to your point, it's sort of trying to democratize it. It's always good. I mean, everyone that trains likes to know where they stand, right? That's part of it's part of being.
I don't mean to demonize UTR at all, and I think there's some really great stuff coming from that company, and there's a lot of good things. But I'll give you an example. Like the kids can be obsessively checking their UTR too much, but sometimes like coaches will insist that your player's improving. And there are bad coaches out there, and they will say to parents, don't worry, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. We'll get there in the long run. And that can be kind of a scam. Your parents should watch out for that, because you should see a steady rise in UTR. If a player is improving intrinsically, you should see the extrinsic UTR, the rise in UTR. You should see that. And so for parents, it can be helpful to sort of discern whether they're getting good coaching or not, because if the coach is doing their job, the UTR should go up. And if your kid's UTR is stagnant or plateaued, that's usually an indicator that something is wrong. It could be on the coaching side. It could be, like I said, with the training, like maybe your kid's not playing with enough highly competitive players, or maybe they're not playing the right mix of tournaments, but there's something wrong. If your coach is telling you, don't worry, don't worry, don't worry, it will go, that can be a red flag. And I think parents should watch out for that.
I'm so cognizant of your time, and I appreciate it. I think that Jim has a good question to end it on, which is,
okay.
He listens, he's working out, and he wants to know straight up, is there a favorite one exercise to do to help his game? Just one.
Is it off-court exercise or on-court?
Let's give one a quick on-court, a quick off-court, based on maybe the Spanish.
Well, I would have to say there is a sequence of drills from the great legend Luis Bruguera. He's the father of Sergio Bruguera, and he developed a method to improve racket speed, to develop that heavy Spanish ball. And it's the coach feeds in rapid succession, and the player has to strike the ball with maximum acceleration. And so there's a way to do it right. I've seen a lot of, unfortunately, YouTube videos and social media posts that are not doing it correctly and possibly could be injurious, but there's a way to do it's an incredible method of drills that develops racket speed. So that would be the one on the court that I think is really special. And off the court, well, I'm going to go old school here, and can I just plug cardio? Can I just say, do you know that I have many even highly ranked students that tell me that they are not runners, that they don't run at all. Like I say, when's the last time you ran a mile? Never. Only in school on a fitness test once. And I think this is like the pendulum has swung completely the opposite, the wrong direction here, where you have elite players who say that they don't run. And I say that, but tennis is a running sport, right? And they look at me like quizzically. Because you have to be a good runner to be a good tennis player, unless you are a Riley or an Isner or an Ivo Karlovic, or you have to be a good mover and runner. And of course, the demands of tennis are short, multi-directional movements, but you need a good base of cardio. You should be familiar with a track. You should know what a track is. You should know what a 400 is, or a 200, or a 1600.
The top players, you will see them if they are on their off season. If they don't have a tournament, they will find out. They will ask when they arrive. I see it all the time before Indian Wells. Hey, where's the local high school track? Hey, UCLA track. You can go and find, a Dimitra.
Yeah, but Kirk, I have literally top-ranked kids. They tell me I never run. I don't know how to run. What is running? I just play tennis. And that's a red flag. I mean, you've got, because in Spain, the whole Spanish system is built on stamina. That when it goes deep in the match, you're going to be there with your cardio. You're not going to be winded. You're going to be there mentally, because if you lose your cardio, you lose your mind. You can't focus.
You make bad decisions. You try to hit a winner.
You make bad decisions, and so in Spain, they believe to be mentally tough, you got to have that stamina. It has to be there. And so it's remarkable that we have a youth today that don't, tennis players that don't run.
Jim just left the conversation. He's running right now, so he's on.
Now, that being said, you can run too much. There's a lot of pounding on the court. You know, you could bike, you could swim, you could, you know, you have to be judicious if you're running. But just for kids to say, no, I just hit balls. I don't run. That's not for me. Some of the best students I've had are track athletes, cross country runners, and they have a great base for tennis. You know, that's very common.
So much fun. We got to continue this conversation. I think hopefully, you know, we'd like to do is bring, you know, in the next couple of months, a panel of some coaches and some people, because this is, you know, it's great, right? When we were younger, you know, we do our training, but to be able to have access just to that data. And, you know, I would say it was a fun drill in New Jersey. There was a place that we tried to do the Spanish style, that exercise with PlaySite that's measuring the RPMs, like how fast you're doing. And there were two Spanish guys that literally doubled what we were doing, like what we were hitting.
Yeah. And some of that's genetic, but a lot of that's the training system. You can actually, I believe it's trainable, and that they do that. Yeah, I would love to I want to get my book into your curriculum somehow. The kids make kids. The new edition coming out is really, it's great. It's even better than the first.
Let's plug it. So for everyone here, you know, can we order on Amazon, or we should wait for the next
No,
edition?
It's coming out. The second edition is coming out this summer. We're going to try to coordinate it with the US Open, the book launch, my publisher says. But it's really, there's a lot of changes. You know, I wrote the book almost 10 years ago, and there's been a lot of changes in Spanish tennis. And anyone who's interested in the way they train in Spain, I mean, I think it's the definitive, you know, book on that subject.
Do you want to give where they can get it now, and title, name, or where?
Right now, it's just Secrets of Spanish Tennis, and it's everywhere. On Amazon, it's in bookstores. It's I don't know if you want the one now or you want to wait for the next one.
All right, I bet, yeah, maybe pre-order.
I just finished the manuscript, and it's the next one blows the first one out of the water.
All right, let's hold off, but we will be there to support you. We really appreciate your time. Can't wait to get back to Vermont, and I think you'll be part of the family, the ICL family, for a long time. This is really great.
All right, appreciate it. Great talking with you, and especially with the little guys, the players.
Absolutely. Take care. Thanks again, Chris. Take care. Bye.